What you are about to hear is a work of fiction. The people, places, and events depicted in this story are products of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual individuals, living or deceased, or to real situations is purely coincidental. These stories may explore themes of crime, injustice, and human suffering. While fictional, they reflect real emotions and difficult truths that some may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised.
James's control finally snapped completely. You want to know how it was? Fine. You were pathetic, Violet. A rich little princess who was so desperate for love that you'd believe anything. You made it easy for us. Please, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to know just how far our stories reach. But let's start from the beginning, 3 weeks before that devastating moment when Violet Thompson-Wilson still believed in the fairy tale. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thompson estate, casting golden light across the imported Italian marble floors. Violet stood in her spacious kitchen, watching her husband James examine a package that had just arrived. At 35, she possessed the kind of understated elegance that came from generations of old money, her auburn hair pulled back in a simple chignon, wearing a cream silk blouse and tailored navy slacks. "Another watch?" she asked with gentle amusement as James carefully lifted a sleek timepiece from its velvet box. James looked up with that charming smile that had first captured her heart nearly 3 years ago. At 38, he was still devastatingly handsome, tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "It's vintage Patek Philippe," he said, fastening it around his wrist. "I know it seems extravagant, but it's actually a good investment. These pieces only appreciate in value." Violet nodded, though she couldn't help but notice this was the 4th investment watch he'd purchased in past couple of months. The walk-in closet in their master suite was beginning to look like a luxury retail showroom, filled with designer suits and with gorgeous wooden display case that he had made to properly store the watches. James insisted those were smart financial moves. She'd inherited $57 million when her parents died in a car accident 5 years ago as her part in the estate, and she wanted James to feel comfortable, so their shared account was always adequately supplied with funds. Ensuring that it stayed that way, though, was getting harder to do, as James' investments in art and jewelry kept rising. "Of course, darling," she said, kissing his cheek. "You have such good taste." Grace Matthews appeared in the doorway, carrying a silver tray with fresh coffee. At 45, Grace had the kind of reliable presence that made a house feel like a home. She'd worked for the Thompson family for 20 years, starting when Violet was just a teenager, and had been more than a housekeeper, especially since her parents passed away. She was family. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson, Miss Violet," Grace said, setting the tray on the kitchen island. Her voice was warm but professional, though Violet couldn't help but notice the slight tightness around her eyes when she looked at James. "Grace, you know you don't have to be so formal," Violet laughed. "You practically raised Becca and me." "Some habits die hard," Grace replied with a small smile. "Speaking of Miss Rebecca, she called this morning. Her flight lands at 3. Violet's face lit up. She hadn't seen her younger sister in 6 months, not since Rebecca's college graduation. At 24, Rebecca was everything Violet had been at that age: confident, ambitious, and ready to take on the world. She was taking a few weeks to visit before deciding between several job offers, including one in New York and another in London. "I can't wait to see her," Violet said. "It feels like forever since we've had real time together." James's expression flickered, so briefly that Violet missed it, but Grace caught the momentary irritation that crossed his features. "How long is she planning to stay?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Just a few weeks. She wants to decompress after graduation and figure out her next step. You don't mind, do you?" "Of course not," James said smoothly, his face opening into a gentle smile. "Family is family. Besides, This is her home too. Grace excused herself to prepare the guest room, and Violet found herself humming as she planned activities for Rebecca's visit. She didn't notice James immediately pulling out his phone to send a text, or the way his fingers drummed impatiently on the marble countertop. Later that afternoon, Violet waited in the circular driveway as Robert Matthews pulled the black Mercedes through the estate's iron gates. At 50, Robert shared his wife's steady, dependable nature. He'd been with the family almost as long as Grace, serving as driver, groundskeeper, and general handyman. His weathered face broke into a genuine smile when he saw Violet practically bouncing on her toes with excitement. "She's grown up beautiful, Miss Violet," Robert said as he opened the car door. "Smart as a whip, too. Grace and I are proud to have watched both you girls become the women you are." Rebecca Thompson stepped out of the car like a whirlwind of energy and sophistication. She'd inherited the family's auburn hair but wore hers in loose waves around her shoulders. Her green eyes, a shade brighter than Violet's, sparkled with intelligence and mischief. She was dressed casually in dark jeans and a cream sweater, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and where she was going. "Vi!" Rebecca launched herself into her sister's arms, and for a moment, they were just two sisters happy to be together again. "God, I've missed you," Violet whispered, holding her tight. "Look at you, you look amazing. Corporate life is going to suit you." "If I choose corporate life," Rebecca grinned, pulling back to study her sister's face. "I'm still weighing my options, but first, I want to hear everything about married life. Where's the famous husband?" "James had to run some errands, but he'll be back for dinner. Amanda's coming too, you remember Amanda from college? She's been such a lifeline since the wedding." Something flickered across Rebecca's face, a moment of confusion. "Amanda Peterson? Your roommate from sophomore year?" "Yes, she moved back to the city last year and we've rekindled our friendship. She's been wonderful." Rebecca nodded slowly, though her expression remained thoughtful. She remembered Amanda as competitive and somewhat calculating, not the type of person she would have expected to become Violet's closest friend. But it had been many years since she'd last seen her. Perhaps people changed. As Robert carried Rebecca's luggage inside, Grace emerged from the house with a warm embrace for the younger Thompson sister. "Rebecca, sweetheart, it's so good to have you home," Grace said, and Rebecca felt the genuine affection in the words. "It's good to be home, Grace. How's David? I heard he finished his hospitality management degree." Grace's face glowed with pride. "He did wonderfully. He's been working at a resort management company in Chicago, but he's thinking of moving back to the area. The travel industry has been so good to him." "I'd love to catch up with him," Rebecca said. "It's been, 6 years since I've seen him? We used to have such fun when we were teenagers." "I'll tell him you asked about him," Grace promised. "He's always spoken fondly of those summer days when you'd all hang out by the pool." Since David lived with his parents in an apartment within the property, the Thompsons always insisted he have a free run of the estate. Rebecca and David had pretty much grown together as they were of similar age. As they walked into the house, Rebecca took in the familiar surroundings with fresh eyes. The Thompson estate was beautiful, understated luxury in every detail, from the crystal chandelier in the foyer to the Persian rugs on the hardwood floors. But something felt different, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what. "The house looks amazing," she said. "Have you redecorated?" Violet's face brightened. "James has such an eye for art and antiques. He's helped me add some really beautiful pieces." Rebecca noticed several new additions, and marble sculpture in the hallway, a vintage clock on the mantelpiece, and what appeared to be an original oil painting above the piano. All tasteful, all clearly expensive. "He obviously has wonderful taste. He married you," Rebecca agreed playfully, though something nagged at her. The pieces were beautiful, but they didn't seem anything like Violet's style. Her sister had always preferred simpler, more modern aesthetics. That evening, James returned home just as Grace was putting the finishing touches on dinner. He swept into the house with the easy confidence that had initially charmed Violet, carrying a bottle of fine wine and wearing one of his new watches. "Rebecca, finally we meet," he said, embracing her with what seemed like genuine warmth. "You look fantastic. College certainly agreed with you." "Thank you, James. Congratulations on the marriage. I'm sorry I couldn't make it to the wedding." Rebecca had been doing an internship abroad as part of an exchange program. During their small ceremony, something that had disappointed Violet at the time. "These things happen," James said smoothly. "The important thing is that you're here now." When Amanda arrived 30 minutes later, Rebecca felt a flicker of unease. Amanda Peterson had been attractive in college, but she'd transformed herself into something more polished, perhaps even less spontaneous. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She wore a designer dress that might have cost more than Rebecca's entire wardrobe, a sharp contrast to Rebecca's own preference for practicality over extravagance. "Rebecca!" Amanda exclaimed, air kissing both of Rebecca's cheeks. "Look at you, all grown up. Violet's told me so much about your achievements." "It's nice to see you again, Amanda," Rebecca replied politely. Dinner was an elegant affair in the formal dining room, with Grace serving course after course of expertly prepared food. The conversation flowed easily. James was charming and attentive, Amanda was vivacious and engaging, and Violet seemed genuinely happy. But Rebecca found herself observing rather than participating, her journalistic instincts picking up on subtle undercurrents. She saw how James redirected conversations away from his work when asked about specifics. Most troubling, she observed how different Violet seemed, more subdued, more deferential, as if she was trying to please rather than simply being herself. "So James," Rebecca said during a lull in conversation, "Violet mentioned you have a business trip coming up. What industry are you in exactly?" James's smile didn't falter, but Rebecca noticed the faintest hesitation before he spoke. "Investment consulting, mostly. I work with high-net-worth individuals. Portfolio optimization, tax strategies, that kind of thing," he gave a slight shrug. "It does mean a fair bit of travel. Conferences, client visits, staying ahead of the market." "That sounds fascinating. Which firm do you work with?" "I'm actually between positions right now," James said smoothly, "consulting independently while I evaluate some partnership opportunities. The market's been very good to people with my expertise." Rebecca nodded, but something felt off. She'd studied business and economics. She knew the industry. James's answers were vague, generic. The kind of things someone might say if they were improvising. "Where's your next conference?" she asked casually. "In Colorado Springs, at a resort. One of those conferences where everyone spends the whole day inside the hotel," James answered. "It's supposed to be absolutely beautiful this time of year," commented Amanda, her tone light, though for some reason it drew a slight frown from James. "Yes," he said after a beat. 3 days of sessions on emerging market trends won't leave much free time to appreciate it, though." The conversation moved on, but Rebecca filed away every detail. Something was definitely off, and her protective instincts were fully engaged. After dinner, James excused himself to take a work call, and Amanda left early, citing a morning appointment. Rebecca stayed behind to help Grace clear the table. "Grace," she said quietly, "is everything okay here? Violet seems different." Grace's hands stilled on the china she was stacking. She glanced toward the door, as if making sure no one could overhear, then looked back at Rebecca. "Your sister's a grown woman," she said carefully. But? "Robert and I have been concerned." She hesitated. "Mr. Wilson, he doesn't treat her the way she deserves. He's always polite, but he can be dismissive. And he's changed things around here." Grace lowered her voice. Violet used to be so confident, so sure of herself. Now she second-guesses everything. Rebecca felt her heart sink. What kind of things has he changed? Little things at first, he convinced her to let go of some of her oldest friends, said they were jealous of her happiness. Then it was the household decisions, the social calendar, and the spending. Grace shook her head. Robert and I have watched this family for 20 years. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were careful with money. They respected what they had. But Mr. Wilson spends like there is no tomorrow. On what? Art, watches, clothes, and cars. You haven't had a chance to see it, but the garage is at capacity. Besides the Mercedes, there's an SUV, a high-end British car of some sort, and a Ferrari. Even I recognize that one, she said. He always justifies it as investments, but... Grace lowered her voice further. Robert saw some papers on Mr. Wilson's desk last week when he was cleaning the office. Bank statements, account information. It looked like he's moving a lot of money around. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. Grace, do you think... I think your sister needs her family right now, Grace interrupted gently. I think she needs someone who will look out for her the way her parents would have wanted. That night, Rebecca lay in her childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and processing everything she'd observed. Her sister was in trouble, she was sure of it. James was charming, but seemed manipulative. Amanda had always been controlled, almost artificial in a way. Violet was being systematically isolated, influenced, and possibly controlled. If James was up to something nefarious, she'd need proof. Solid proof. She needed the kind of evidence that would open Violet's eyes and protect her from whatever scheme was unfolding. And she was going to find it. The next morning, Rebecca was up early, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee when James walked in, dressed for his morning run. He was surprised to see her there. "You're up early," he commented, grabbing a bottle of water from the refrigerator. "Jet lag?" Rebecca lied smoothly. "Plus, I've always been a morning person. When do you leave for your conference?" "Tomorrow afternoon. Just a quick trip. I'll be back Saturday." "You're going to Colorado Springs, right?" "That's right." James's tone was casual, but Rebecca noticed his hand tighten on the water bottle. "I have a friend who works in hospitality management out there. Maybe I should give him a call, see about getting you the royal treatment." For just a moment, James's mask slipped. Rebecca caught a flicker of something cold and calculating in his eyes before the charming smile returned. "I wouldn't want you to go to any trouble. I'll be spending most of the time in sessions, so I'll just be there to sleep." "No trouble at all," Rebecca said sweetly. "If you change your mind, just let me know." James left for his run, and Rebecca immediately called Grace to her room. "Grace, I need to ask David for a favor. Could you please get me his phone number?" Grace studied Rebecca's face, seeing the determination there. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to save my sister," Rebecca said simply, "but I'm going to need help." An hour later, Rebecca was on the phone with David Matthews. His voice was deeper than she remembered, more mature, but she could still hear the warmth in it when he realized who was calling. "Rebecca Thompson," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "This is a surprise. Mom told me you were visiting." "David, I need your help with something important. It's about Violet." The warmth in his voice shifted instantly to concern. "What's wrong?" Rebecca explained her suspicions about James, about the supposed business conference, about her growing certainty that something was off about her sister's husband. "I need someone in the hospitality industry to help me investigate," she said. "Someone who can find out what this conference is really about, and who James meets while he's there." "I can do that," David said without hesitation. "The most likely location in Colorado Springs would be the Grandview Resort. I actually have contacts there. Let me make some calls." "There's more," Rebecca said. "If I'm right, I'll need proof. The kind of evidence Violet can't deny or explain away." "What did you have in mind?" "I want you to be at that hotel when he arrives. I want you to document everything. Photos, video, whatever we can get. I'll cover your travel and your time, whatever it takes." David was quiet for a moment. "Rebecca, you don't need to pay me. Violet and your family have done more for mine than we could ever repay." My college education, the opportunities I've had, none of it would have been possible without your parents' generosity. If Violet's in trouble, I'll help. No question. Thank you, she said, feeling relief wash over her. David, I might be overreacting. Are you sure you want to get involved? David's laugh was warm and familiar. Rebecca, it's been a long time since we talked, but I know you. You wouldn't be doing this unless there was a reason. He paused, then added more playfully, besides, if something goes wrong, you'll be right there with me. Something fluttered in Rebecca's chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced since she was 18 and secretly in love with Grace and Robert's son. Okay. I'll book us rooms at the Grandview Resort. When can you get there? I can be there by tomorrow evening, Rebecca. Yes? We're going to figure this out. We're going to protect Violet. As Rebecca hung up the phone, she felt a mixture of determination and anticipation. She was going to figure out what was going on and, if necessary, rescue her sister. And she was going to see David Matthews again after 6 years, the boy she'd had a crush on when he left for college, who'd grown into a man. He had always been kind, trustworthy, and honest. Everything James Wilson was not. The next afternoon, Rebecca made her excuses about visiting college friends and drove to the airport. James had left an hour earlier, kissing Violet goodbye and promising to call every evening. Violet was a bit miffed when Rebecca had told her that she would be going to see some of college friends because she wouldn't have any company for a few days. It turned out that Amanda had booked a cruise with a group of friends. As Rebecca boarded her flight to Colorado, she felt the familiar thrill of the hunt that had made her such a good journalism student. She was going to uncover the truth, no matter what it cost. A few hours later, Rebecca stood in a corner of the elegant lobby of the Grandview Resort, trying to be inconspicuous while scanning the crowd for a familiar face. The resort was exactly as luxurious as advertised: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains. It looked a lot more like the perfect place for a romantic getaway than for an investment conference. Rebecca? She turned at the sound of her name and felt her breath catch. David Matthews had matured beautifully. At 26, he was tall and lean, with warm brown eyes and dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. He was dressed casually in dark jeans and a button-down shirt, but he carried himself with a confidence that spoke of success and self-assurance. "David," she said, and suddenly she was 18 again, feeling butterflies in her stomach. "You look, wow." He grinned, and it was the same grin she remembered from all those summer afternoons by the pool. "You look pretty wow yourself. College was definitely good to you." They embraced, and Rebecca caught the scent of his cologne, something clean and masculine that made her want to lean closer. When they pulled apart, his hands lingered on her arms, and she saw something in his eyes that mirrored what she was feeling. "So," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before, "ready to do some snooping around?" "More than ready," Rebecca replied. "What did you find out about the conference?" David's expression grew serious. "There's no conference, Rebecca. I called the resort directly and spoke to 3 different departments. No business events are scheduled for this week at all. But I did find something interesting." He pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot. "James Wilson checked in this afternoon. But he's not alone, and he's not registered under any business rate. He's in the honeymoon suite, and according to my contact at the front desk, the reservation was made by his secretary. I wrote it down. Let me check my notes. Here it is. Amanda. He registered as Mr. and Mrs. Wilson." "Amanda!" Rebecca felt sick. "They're using my sister's last name." "Do you know her?" David asked. "Yeah, she is Violet's best friend," she said, making air quotes as she said the last part. "Well, it gets worse," David said gently. "This isn't the first time. My friend did some checking. They have been here before, multiple times over the past year, in fact. Always the same suite, always registered as husband and wife." The betrayal was even deeper than Rebecca had imagined. This wasn't a new affair. It was a long-term relationship being conducted right under Violet's nose, funded by Violet's money. "I want pictures," Rebecca said, her voice hard with determination. "I want video. I want evidence so clear that even Violet can't deny what's happening. We have to be careful to remain out of sight, but I can get us positioned to do that," David said. "But Rebecca, are you sure you want to see this? It's going to be painful." Rebecca looked up at him, seeing the concern in his eyes, the genuine care for her feelings. It struck her that she'd forgotten how good David was, how fundamentally decent and kind. The boy she'd had a crush on had grown into a man she could easily fall for. "I need to see it," she said. "For Violet's sake, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." David nodded. "Then let's go catch them." They spent the evening strategically positioned in the resort's public areas, the elegant bar, the restaurant, and the lobby lounge. At 9:30, James and Amanda appeared, dressed for dinner and obviously comfortable in each other's company. They were seated at an intimate table for two, holding hands across the candlelit surface, sharing food and laughing like two lovers without a care in the world. Rebecca felt her anger building as she watched them. James was wearing one of the expensive watches Violet had paid for, and Amanda was dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than most people made in a month. They were living a fantasy life on her sister's money while Violet sat at home, trusting and unsuspecting. David was discreetly filming with his phone, positioned at an angle where he could capture their intimate behavior without being obvious. "This is sickening," Rebecca whispered as James leaned across the table to kiss Amanda's hand. "I know," David replied quietly, "but we're getting exactly what we need. No court in the world would believe this is anything other than an affair." After dinner, James and Amanda moved to the bar, where they continued their romantic evening. Rebecca and David followed, very discreetly, at a distance, documenting everything. When the couple finally headed toward the elevators, clearly intending to retire to their suite, David stopped recording. "That's enough for tonight," he said. "We have what we need." Rebecca and David retreated to the hotel's quiet library, spreading their evidence across a table like detectives building a case. The photos were damning, clear shots of James and Amanda holding hands, kissing, behaving like honeymooners. The video footage showed the same intimate behavior from multiple angles. "This is going to destroy Violet," Rebecca said, staring at a particularly clear photo of James kissing Amanda's forehead. "But it's also going to save her," David pointed out. "She deserves to know the truth." Rebecca looked up at him, studying his face in the soft lamplight. "I can't believe you dropped everything to help me with this. You barely know me anymore." David's expression grew serious. "Rebecca, I know this might sound crazy, but I never stopped thinking about you. You were this bright, determined girl who was going to change the world, and I always wondered what happened to her. When you called yesterday, it felt like the universe was giving me a second chance." "A second chance at what?" Rebecca asked, though her heart was already racing. "A second chance to tell you that I had the biggest crush on you when we were teenagers. A second chance to find out if the woman you became is as amazing as the girl I remembered." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. "David, I know this isn't the time or place," he said quickly. "You're dealing with a family crisis, and I don't want to complicate things, but I wanted you to know." Rebecca reached across the table and took his hand. "You're not complicating anything, actually you're making it easier. I feel like I can handle anything as long as I'm not doing it alone." David's fingers intertwined with hers, warm and strong and reassuring. "You're not alone, Rebecca. Whatever happens next, I'll be there for you." They spent the next hour planning their strategy for the following day. They would gather more evidence, document James and Amanda's behavior during daylight hours, and then Rebecca would return home to confront her sister with the truth. "I keep thinking about how to tell her," Rebecca said as they walked back toward their rooms. "How do you destroy someone's entire worldview? How do you tell your sister that her husband and best friend have been betraying her for months, maybe years?" "You tell her with love," David said simply. You show her that she has people who truly care about her, people who will stand by her no matter what. They stopped in front of Rebecca's door, both reluctant to end the evening despite the painful circumstances that had brought them together. "David," Rebecca said, looking up at him, "thank you for everything." "Thank you for trusting me," he replied, "for letting me help." They were standing close now, close enough that Rebecca could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. The attraction that had been simmering all evening was becoming impossible to ignore. "I should probably get some sleep," Rebecca said, though she made no move toward her door. "Probably," David agreed, though he stepped closer instead of backing away. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult." "Very difficult." "We need to stay focused." Absolutely focused. And then somehow, they were kissing. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both testing whether this was real or just a product of heightened emotions and shared memories. But when Rebecca's arms wound around David's neck and his hands framed her face, the kiss deepened into something that was definitely real, definitely right. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "That wasn't supposed to happen," Rebecca whispered. "No," David agreed, though his thumb was tracing her cheekbone and his eyes were warm with affection. "But I'm not sorry it did." "Neither am I," Rebecca admitted. "But David, I can't think about this right now. I can't think about us until I've taken care of Violet." "I know," he said, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Your sister comes first. But Rebecca? When this is over, when Violet is safe and happy again, I want to explore whatever this is between us." "I want that too," Rebecca said. "More than you know." The next morning brought fresh evidence of James and Amanda's deception. Rebecca and David positioned themselves for breakfast surveillance and watched the couple share an intimate meal, feeding each other strawberries and acting like honeymooners on their anniversary trip. "Look at her ring finger," David said quietly, adjusting his camera angle. Rebecca focused on Amanda's hands and felt her stomach drop. "She's wearing a wedding band." "They're playing house," David observed grimly. "This isn't just an affair. They are living out some fantasy where they're actually married." The evidence they gathered that morning was even more damning than the previous evening's material. James and Amanda went for a romantic walk around the resort grounds, had a couple's massage at the spa, and spent the afternoon by the pool acting like devoted newlyweds. By the time Rebecca boarded her flight back home that evening, she had hours of video footage and hundreds of photographs that painted an undeniable picture of betrayal. David was taking a later flight, planning to arrive back in the city the following day. "Call me as soon as you've talked to Violet," he said as they parted ways at the airport. "Whatever happens, I want to be there for both of you." Rebecca kissed him goodbye, a quick, soft kiss that promised more to come when their crisis was resolved. "I will. And David, thank you for being precisely the man I hoped you'd be." The flight home gave Rebecca time to think about how to approach Violet. She couldn't just drop the evidence like a bomb. She needed to be strategic, gentle, but firm. Violet was going to be devastated, but she was also going to need to take action quickly to protect herself financially and legally. When Rebecca arrived home late that evening, she found Violet in the living room with a glass of wine, looking lonely and slightly melancholic. "How was your trip?" Violet asked, brightening when she saw her sister. "Actually, Vi, I need to talk to you about something important, something about James." Violet's face immediately grew wary. "What about James?" Rebecca sat down beside her sister, taking her hands. "I need you to listen to me with an open mind, okay? I need you to know that everything I'm about to show you comes from a place of love." "Rebecca, you're scaring me." "James isn't at a business conference, Violet. He's at a resort in Colorado with Amanda. They're registered as husband and wife, and they've been having an affair for at least a year." Violet's face went white. "That's not." "Rebecca, that's impossible. You're wrong." "I wish I were wrong," Rebecca said gently, pulling out her phone. "But I have proof. Videos, photos, and hotel records. I'm so sorry, Vi, but James and Amanda have been betraying you. What followed was the most painful hour of Rebecca's life. She watched her strong, confident sister crumble as the evidence mounted. Each photograph was another blow, each video clip another crack in Violet's carefully constructed world. "How long have you known?" Violet finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I suspected something Tuesday night at dinner. I've been investigating since then." "And you didn't tell me?" "Actually, Vi, I only had a feeling that there was something off about James, but I hadn't made any connection to Amanda. I needed to know if there was anything weird going on, so I decided to investigate." Violet was quiet for a long time, staring at the photos spread across the coffee table. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red with tears, but blazing with anger. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now we plan," Rebecca said firmly. "We figure out exactly how much damage they've done, we protect your assets, and we make sure they face consequences for what they've done to you." "I trusted them," Violet whispered. "I trusted them completely." "I know," Rebecca said, pulling her sister into her arms. "But you have people who truly love you, Vi. You have Grace and Robert, you have me, and we're going to get through this together." Violet cried then, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from her soul. Rebecca held her, whispering reassurances and promises that everything would be okay. When the tears finally stopped, Violet pulled back and wiped her eyes. "What's our first step?" "Tomorrow morning, we call your attorney. We figure out what legal options you have. Then we start planning how to confront them." "I want them both here when I confront them," Violet said, her voice growing stronger. "I want to see their faces when they realize I know the truth." "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I'll be ready," Violet said firmly. "I'm going to stop being a victim and start fighting back." The next morning, Grace and Robert arrived to find both sisters in the kitchen, surrounded by legal documents and printed emails. Rebecca had spent the night helping Violet inventory James's purchases and financial access, and the scope of his spending was staggering. "Ladies," Grace said carefully, taking in their grim expressions, "is everything all right?" "Grace, Robert," Violet said, looking up from the papers. "I need to tell you something about James, something that's going to be difficult to hear." Rebecca watched as Grace and Robert processed the truth about James and Amanda's betrayal. Their shock quickly turned to anger. Not just at the deception, but at seeing Violet hurt by people who should have protected her. "What can we do?" Robert asked simply. "How can we help?" "David should be back in the city today," Rebecca said. "Grace, could you please call him? I think we're going to need his help with what comes next." "Of course, dear. He'll be here as soon as I call." An hour later, David arrived at the estate, still carrying his overnight bag from his flight. When he saw Rebecca, his face lit up with relief and affection, but his expression grew serious when he took in the gravity of the situation. "How are you holding up?" he asked Violet, giving her a gentle hug. "I'm angry," Violet said simply, "but I'm ready to do something about it." Rebecca felt her heart skip when David smiled at her. It was a warm, supportive smile that reminded her she wasn't alone in this fight. "What's the plan?" David asked. "James comes back tomorrow evening," Rebecca explained. "I'm going to invite Amanda for dinner, claiming I want to celebrate finding my career direction. When they're both here, we'll confront them with the evidence." "Are you sure you want to do it that way?" David asked. "It could get ugly." "I'm counting on it getting ugly," Violet said, steel in her voice. "I want them to know that I'm not the naive woman they thought they could manipulate forever." David helped coordinate the logistics, ensuring everything would be ready for the confrontation. As they worked side by side, Rebecca found herself stealing glances at David. Despite the serious circumstances, she couldn't ignore the way her pulse quickened when their hands accidentally touched while organizing papers, or how his presence made her feel stronger and more confident. "You're staring," David said softly during a moment when Violet and Grace were in the other room. "I'm not staring," Rebecca protested, though she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You're definitely staring," he said with a gentle smile. Not that I mind. I've been doing my share of looking too. David, we shouldn't. I know, he said, moving closer. I know this isn't the time, but Rebecca, when this is over, I want to take you to dinner. I want to know everything about the woman you've become. I want to see if what I'm feeling is real. It's real, Rebecca said quietly. At least, it is for me. Then we have something to look forward to, David said, his fingers briefly touching hers before they returned to their work. The next evening, James returned from his business trip in high spirits, full of stories about productive meetings and valuable networking opportunities. He kissed Violet hello and complimented Grace on the dinner she was preparing, playing the role of devoted husband perfectly. Rebecca watched from the kitchen doorway, marveling at his performance. If she hadn't seen the evidence herself, she might have believed he really had been at a business conference. "How was the trip, darling?" Violet asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil Rebecca knew she was feeling. "Excellent," James said, loosening his tie. "Very productive meetings, some promising new contacts. I think we're looking at some significant opportunities in the coming months." "That's wonderful," Violet said. "Amanda's coming for dinner tonight. Rebecca wanted to celebrate finding her career direction, and I thought it would be nice to have our closest friends together." Something flickered across James's face. It was so quick that someone who wasn't looking for it might have missed it. But Rebecca caught it, a moment of calculation, possibly concern. "Of course," James said smoothly. "It'll be good to catch up with Amanda. I'm sure she'll want to hear about my trip." Rebecca felt sick at his casual lies, but she kept her expression neutral. Soon, very soon, his house of cards would come crashing down. Amanda arrived promptly at 7, dressed elegantly in a black cocktail dress and looking perfectly composed. She embraced Violet warmly, complimented Rebecca on her post-graduation glow, and kissed James's cheek in what appeared to be a casual, friendly greeting. "You look rested," she told James. "The conference must have been relaxing as well as productive." "You know how these things are," James replied. "Long days but beautiful surroundings. The resort was magnificent." Rebecca and David exchanged a look. Amanda was good, very good. If Rebecca didn't know better, she would never suspect that Amanda had spent the last 3 days sharing a honeymoon suite with James. Right after Amanda arrived, the bell rang again, and Rebecca quickly opened the door. "David, it's great you could come." Turning, she made the introductions. "Amanda, James, this is David," Rebecca introduced. "He's an old friend I invited to join my celebration tonight." Dinner proceeded normally for the first hour. Grace served course after course while the conversation flowed around safe topics. Rebecca's job prospects, Amanda's work at a marketing firm, and James's vague descriptions of his conference sessions. Violet played the perfect hostess, though Rebecca could see the tension in her sister's shoulders. When Grace cleared the main course, Rebecca stood up. "Before dessert, I wanted to share something with everyone. As you know, I've been thinking about my career options, and I've made a decision." "Oh, how exciting!" Amanda exclaimed. "What have you decided?" "I've decided to pursue investigative journalism," Rebecca said, her voice steady and clear. "I discovered I have a real talent for uncovering the truth, especially when people I care about are being deceived." James's looked uncomfortable. Amanda's smile faltered slightly. "That sounds wonderful, dear," Violet said, playing her part perfectly. "You were always good at getting to the bottom of things." "I am," Rebecca agreed. "For instance, I recently investigated a story about a businessman who was supposedly attending conferences at luxury resorts. But when I dug deeper, I discovered he wasn't attending conferences at all. He was having romantic getaways with his lover, using his wife's money to fund their affair." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. James set down his linen napkin, his charming smile still in place but his eyes growing cold. Amanda had gone very still. "That's terrible," Amanda said, her voice slightly strained. "Some people have no conscience." No, Rebecca agreed, reaching for the remote control to the dining room's entertainment system. They really don't. In fact, I have some photos from my investigation that I think you'd find very interesting. The large screen on the wall flickered to life, and suddenly the room was filled with crystal-clear images of James and Amanda at the Grandview Resort. The first photo showed them holding hands across a candlelit dinner table. The second showed James kissing Amanda's hand. The third showed them embracing by the pool. Amanda gasped audibly. James went completely white. You see, Rebecca continued conversationally, advancing to the next slide. When I heard about this conference at the Grandview Resort, I thought I'd call a friend who works in hospitality management. Imagine my surprise when he told me there was no conference scheduled there at all. The screen now showed a video clip of James and Amanda walking hand in hand through the resort lobby, clearly comfortable and familiar with each other. Rebecca, James started, his voice strangled. Oh, I'm not done yet, Rebecca said pleasantly. You see, what I found most interesting was the hotel registration. Mr. and Mrs. James Wilson checked into the honeymoon suite. Amanda, you were registered as James's wife, using my sister's last name while you conducted your affair with her husband. Violet stood up slowly, her face pale but her voice deadly calm. How long? She asked. James and Amanda looked at each other, their carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. Violet, I can explain, James began. How long? Violet repeated, her voice rising. It's not what it looks like, Amanda tried, but her voice was shaking. It's not what it looks like? Rebecca laughed harshly, advancing to the next slide. This is a photo of you two having dinner at a resort where you were registered as a couple. In the honeymoon suite that was paid for with my sister's credit card. The room erupted. James jumped to his feet, his charming mask finally slipping completely. You had no right to spy on us. I had every right to protect my sister from the two people who were supposed to love her most. Rebecca shot back. This is between Violet and me, James snarled. You're just a jealous little sister who can't stand to see her sibling happy. Happy? Violet's voice cut through the argument like a blade. You call this happy, James? You call systematically lying to me, stealing from me, and humiliating me with my best friend making me happy? Violet, please, Amanda tried, tears starting to flow. It just happened. We never meant for it to go this far. Never meant for it to go this far? David spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but furious. You've been conducting this affair for over a year. You've stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. You've isolated Violet from her friends and family. This wasn't an accident, Amanda. This was a calculated plan. James whirled on David. Who the hell are you to have an opinion about this? He's someone who actually cares about this family, Rebecca said fiercely. Unlike you and Amanda, who saw Violet as nothing more than a bank account with legs. That's not true, Amanda protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Violet asked, her voice growing stronger. Then explain this, Amanda. She picked up a folder from the sideboard and pulled out bank statements. James has spent $700,000 in the past year. Art, watches, jewelry, and clothes. All charged to my accounts. And this, she held up another document, is an application for a credit card in my name that I never applied for. A credit card that's been used exclusively at the hotels where you two have been meeting. James's face had gone from white to red with fury. You have no right to go through my personal belongings. Your personal belongings? Violet laughed, but there was no humor in it. James, you don't have any personal belongings. Everything you own was bought with my money. Every watch, every suit, every piece of art in this house all paid for by me while you were planning to betray me? We love each other. Amanda burst out desperately. This wasn't supposed to happen, but we fell in love. When? Rebecca demanded. When did you fall in love? Before or after you realized how much money Violet had? It's not about the money. It was all about the money. Violet cut Amanda off. Grace and Robert had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. They stood like silent sentinels, their faces grim with righteous anger. "You targeted me," Violet said, her voice filled with heartbreak and rage. "Both of you. You saw a lonely woman with money, and you decided to take advantage of her." "That's not how it was," James protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then how was it, James?" Violet demanded. "Tell me how it was when you married me while planning to steal from me. Tell me how it was when you brought my best friend into our home while you were sleeping with her behind my back." James's control finally snapped completely. "You want to know how it was? Fine. You were pathetic, Violet, a rich little princess who was so desperate for love that you'd believe anything. You made it easy for us." The words hit Violet like physical blows, but instead of crumbling, she seemed to grow stronger. "Get out," she said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my house, both of you, now." "You can't just throw me out," James said. "I live here. I'm your husband." "Not for much longer," Violet said coldly. "My attorney will be filing for divorce first thing Monday morning. You'll be hearing from him about fraud charges as well." "You can't prove anything in court," Amanda said desperately. "Can't I?" Rebecca smiled grimly. "I have photos, videos, hotel records, bank statements, and testimony from multiple witnesses. I have enough evidence to bury both of you." James took a step toward Violet, his face twisted with rage. "You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? You think your money makes you special?" David moved quickly, placing himself between James and Violet. "I think you need to leave. Now." "This doesn't concern you," James snarled. "Violet's safety concerns me," David replied calmly. "And right now you're making her feel unsafe in her own home." Robert stepped forward from the doorway. "Mr. Wilson, I think it's time for you to collect your things and go." James looked around the room, seeing himself surrounded by people who despised him, and his bravado finally cracked. "Fine," he said, "but you haven't seen the last of me, Violet. We'll see how well you do in divorce court." "Actually," Rebecca said pleasantly, "we'll see how well you do when the district attorney's office reviews the evidence of your fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges." James's face went white again. Without another word, he stormed from the room. They could hear him upstairs, throwing things into suitcases with violent force. Amanda stood frozen in the middle of the dining room, tears streaming down her face. "Violet, please. I know you hate me right now, but I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did hurt me, Amanda," Violet said sadly. "You hurt me in ways I'm not sure if I'll ever recover from. You were supposed to be my friend." "I was your friend. I am your friend." "No," Violet said firmly. "A friend doesn't sleep with your husband. A friend doesn't help steal your money. A friend doesn't lie to your face for months while betraying you behind your back." Amanda looked desperately around the room, seeking support from someone, anyone. But Rebecca's face was cold with contempt. David looked disgusted, and Grace and Robert stood like judgmental statues. "I'll leave," Amanda whispered. "But Violet, someday I hope you can forgive me." "Ha, when it's a cold day in hell," Violet said, her voice hard. Amanda gathered her purse and coat with shaking hands and left the house. A few minutes later, James came downstairs with 2 suitcases, his face a mask of cold fury. "This isn't over, Violet," he said as he reached the front door. "Yes, it is," Violet replied. "It's completely over." After the front door slammed behind James, the house fell into heavy silence. Violet sank into a chair, looking suddenly exhausted. "Are you okay?" Rebecca asked, kneeling beside her sister. "I will be," Violet said. "It hurts now, but I'll be okay because I have people who really love me." She looked around the room at Rebecca, David, Grace, and Robert, the real family, the people who had stood by her when everything else fell apart. "What happens now?" Grace asked gently. "Now we clean up the mess," Rebecca said. We make sure Violet is protected legally and financially. We make sure James and Amanda face consequences for what they've done." "And then?" Violet asked. "Then you start rebuilding your life," David said, "surrounded by people who actually care about you." Over the next few weeks, the legal machinery ground into motion. Violet's attorney, armed with Rebecca and David's evidence, filed for divorce and pressed criminal charges. James's expensive possessions were seized as evidence of fraud. Amanda lost her job when the scandal became public, and both she and James faced a grand jury investigation. The betrayal had been devastating, but the aftermath brought unexpected gifts. Violet rediscovered her strength and independence. Rebecca decided that her calling was in fact in investigative journalism and was offered a position with a prestigious newspaper. And the relationship between Rebecca and David, born out of crisis, grew into something beautiful and lasting. 6 months later, the Thompson estate hosted a different kind of dinner party. Violet, looking more confident and radiant than she had in years, raised her glass to toast her guests. "To real family," she said, looking around the table at Rebecca and David, Grace and Robert, and several old friends she'd rebuilt bridges with. "To the people who stand by you when everything else falls apart." "To real family," everyone echoed, and the room filled with genuine laughter and love. Rebecca reached for David's hand under the table, marveling at how much her life had changed. The investigation that had begun as a mission to save her sister had ended up saving them both. Violet from a destructive marriage, and Rebecca from a life without the man she was falling more in love with every day. "What are you thinking about?" David whispered as the conversation flowed around them. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things," Rebecca replied. "If James and Amanda hadn't betrayed Violet, I never would have called you. We never would have found our way back to each other." "Then I guess I should thank them," David said with a smile. "Don't you dare," Rebecca laughed. "But David?" "Yes? I love you." It was the first time either of them had said the words, and David's face lit up with joy. "I love you too. I think I've been in love with you since we were teenagers, and I just didn't know it yet." Across the table, Violet caught their exchange and smiled. Her marriage had been built on lies and betrayal, but what she was witnessing between her sister and David was real. The kind of love that was worth waiting for, worth fighting for. James and Amanda had taken many things from her: her trust, her confidence, her faith in love. But they hadn't been able to take away what really mattered: her family, her strength, and her ability to recognize real love when she saw it. As the evening wound down and their guests prepared to leave, Violet felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also cleared away the illusions and lies that had clouded her judgment. She was free to build authentic relationships, free to trust her instincts, free to create the life she truly wanted. "Thank you," she said to Rebecca as they hugged goodnight. "For what?" "For saving me. For seeing what I couldn't see. For being brave enough to act on your suspicions." "You would have done the same for me," Rebecca said simply. "I hope so," Violet replied. "I hope I would have been as strong as you were." As Rebecca and David walked hand in hand to David's car, Violet stood in her doorway and watched them go. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The legal proceedings would continue, the healing would take time, and rebuilding her life would require courage she wasn't sure she possessed yet. But tonight, surrounded by people who truly loved her, Violet felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Hope for justice, hope for healing, and hope for a future built on truth instead of lies. The legal proceedings unfolded exactly as Rebecca had predicted. James's financial crimes were impossible to deny when faced with the mountain of evidence. The credit cards opened in Violet's name, the forged signatures, the systematic draining of accounts, all documented with meticulous precision. When the prosecutor laid out the case, even James's expensive attorney advised him to take a plea deal. Amanda's situation was slightly different, but no less devastating. While she hadn't directly committed financial fraud, her participation in the conspiracy and her use of Violet's money during their hotel stays made her an accessory to the crimes. More damaging to her personally was the public humiliation. The scandal spread through their social circles like wildfire, and Amanda found herself ostracized from the community she'd worked so hard to join. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. With evidence of James's fraud and infidelity, Violet was able to recover most of her assets, though some of James's purchases had to be liquidated to pay restitution. The expensive watches, art pieces, and designer clothing that had once symbolized his success were sold at auction, with the proceeds going back to Violet's accounts. 3 months after the confrontation, Rebecca received a call at her new job at the newspaper. James had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for fraud and identity theft. Amanda received 2 years probation and was ordered to pay substantial fines. The judge had been particularly harsh in his assessment of their crimes, calling them a calculated exploitation of trust for personal gain. That evening, Rebecca, who had gotten an apartment in the city to be nearer her work, drove out to the estate to share the news with Violet. She found her sister in the garden, working with her hands in the soil, something Violet had never done during her marriage to James, who had considered gardening beneath their social status. "It's over," Rebecca said, sitting beside Violet on the garden bench. "I know," Violet replied, brushing dirt from her hands. "My attorney called an hour ago. 5 years for James, probation for Amanda. How do you feel?" Violet was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "Relieved," she said finally, "and sad. Not for them, but for the time I lost, for the person I became when I was with them." "You're not that person anymore," Rebecca observed. "No, I'm not," Violet agreed. "I'm stronger now, wiser. I've learned to trust my instincts again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the estate grounds. Grace appeared on the back porch, calling them in for dinner. "Rebecca dear, David's here," Grace announced with a knowing smile. Rebecca's face lit up at the news. Over the past few months, David had become a fixture at family dinners, his relationship with Rebecca growing stronger every day. What had rekindled from a partnership born of necessity had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than either had expected. "He's early," Rebecca said, checking her watch. "He brought something to show you," Grace said mysteriously. "Both of you." Curious, the sisters made their way into the house, where they found David in the living room with a portfolio spread across the coffee table. He looked up when they entered, his face glowing with excitement and nervousness. "David, what's all this?" Violet asked, taking in the architectural drawings and business plans scattered across the table. "It's my proposal," David said, standing to greet Rebecca with a kiss. "For the security consulting business we talked about. I've been working on it for weeks, and I finally finished the presentation." Rebecca picked up one of the drawings, recognizing the floor plan of a small office building downtown. "You found a location?" "I found the perfect location," David confirmed, "and I have my first major client lined up." "Who?" Violet asked, though she was already smiling because she suspected she knew the answer. "It's the hotel chain that operated the resort in Colorado Springs," David said simply. "It seems they weren't happy with the publicity they got for having repeatedly hosted people committing identity theft. Also, if you'll have me, I want to help you rebuild your security. Not just financial, but personal. I want to help you trust again, safely." Violet felt tears spring to her eyes. "David, you don't need to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. "You and your family gave me opportunities I never could have had otherwise. You paid for my education, you supported my parents when they needed it, and you treated me like family when I had no right to expect it. Let me return the favor." "It's not a favor if we're paying you for services," Rebecca pointed out with a laugh. "True," David grinned, "but I'm not charging Violet, she's family." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Over the past few months, the boundaries between employer and employee, between old family, friends, and new romantic partners had blurred into something that felt natural and right. Family, Violet repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Grace appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. Dinner's ready, she announced, and I made David's favorite pot roast with Yorkshire pudding. You didn't have to go to all that trouble, David protested, though his pleased expression betrayed his appreciation. Nonsense, Grace replied. It's not trouble when you're cooking for family. As they made their way to the dining room, Rebecca felt a familiar warmth spreading through her chest. This was what real family felt like, not the artificial bonds created by money or convenience, but the genuine connections forged through loyalty, trust, and love. The dining room had been transformed since that terrible night 6 months ago. Gone were the formal place settings and stilted conversations. Instead, the table was set casually, with mismatched dishes that Grace had collected over the years, and flowers from Violet's garden as a centerpiece. I have an announcement, Violet said as they settled into their seats. I've decided to start a foundation. What kind of foundation? Rebecca asked. One that helps people who've been victims of financial fraud and relationship abuse. I want to use my experience and my resources to help others who find themselves in similar situations. David nodded approvingly. That's a wonderful idea, Violet. There are so many people who don't have the resources or support system you had. Exactly, Violet said. I was lucky. I had Rebecca, I had Grace and Robert, and I had you. But there are people out there who are isolated, who don't have anyone to notice when something's wrong. I could help with the security aspects, David offered, teaching people how to protect their financial information and how to recognize red flags in relationships. And I could help with the investigative side, Rebecca added. Research, fact-checking, maybe even some undercover work to expose scam artists. Grace and Robert exchanged glances from their seats at the table. It had been Robert's idea to join them for dinner, a suggestion that Violet had immediately embraced. The old formalities, the artificial barriers between family and staff, had disappeared along with James and Amanda. We'd like to help too, Grace said quietly, if you'll have us. Grace, you and Robert have already done so much, Violet began. We've watched this family for 20 years, Robert interrupted gently. We've seen the good times and the bad times. This foundation, this new beginning, we want to be part of it. Violet felt tears threatening again. All of you, she said, looking around the table. You're all part of this. We'll build something good together, something that helps people. The conversation flowed easily as they planned the foundation, sharing ideas and enthusiasm. Rebecca found herself watching David as he spoke, marveling at his passion for helping others, his genuine desire to make a difference. This was the man she was falling deeper in love with every day. Not because of some teenage crush, but because of who he truly was. I have something else to share, David said as Grace served dessert. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, setting it on the table beside his plate. Rebecca's breath caught. David. I know it's only been 6 months, he said quickly. I know we've been through an unusual situation, and I don't want you to think this is just emotion or circumstance. But, Rebecca, I've thought about this carefully, and I'm sure. He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring, not ostentatious or flashy, but beautiful in its understated perfection. I love you, David continued, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes. I love your strength, your intelligence, and your loyalty to the people you care about. I love the way you fight for what's right, even when it's difficult. I love the woman you are, and I want to spend my life with you. Rebecca stared at the ring, then at David's face, then at the expectant faces around the table. Grace was wiping tears from her eyes, Robert was beaming with pride, and Violet was smiling like she'd never seen anything so beautiful in her life. Are you asking me to marry you? Rebecca whispered. I'm asking you to marry me, David confirmed. If you'll have me. Rebecca looked at the ring again, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a recent college graduate with no clear direction and no romantic prospects. She'd come home to visit her sister and discovered a web of lies and betrayal that threatened to destroy Violet's life. But in fighting to save her sister, she'd found herself. She'd found her calling, her strength, and her future. She'd found David, not the teenage crush she remembered, but the man he'd become, a man who shared her values, supported her ambitions, and loved her family as much as she did. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, I'll marry you." David's face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Around the table, their family, because that's what they were now, truly family, erupted in cheers and applause. As David kissed her and Violet hugged them both, and Grace dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, Rebecca felt a profound sense of gratitude. James and Amanda had tried to destroy this family, but they'd only made it stronger. They'd tried to isolate Violet, but they'd brought everyone closer together. The false friends were gone, replaced by true family. The lies had been exposed, replaced by truth and trust. And the future, once uncertain and clouded by deception, now stretched ahead bright with possibility. "To new beginnings," Violet said, raising her glass of wine. "To real love," Grace added, raising her water glass. "To family," Robert concluded, his voice thick with emotion. "To family," they all echoed. And Rebecca knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The story of betrayal was over. The story of healing, love, and new beginnings was just beginning. Thank you for watching this story of false friends and true family. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones closest to us, but sometimes those who save us are closer than we ever imagined. Remember that real family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who stand by you when everything else falls apart, who fight for you when you can't fight for yourself, and who love you not for what you have, but for who you are. Thank you for listening until the end. If you enjoyed the story, please consider leaving us a like. This helps us reach more people.